Blackdeer describes herself proudly as an old woman. She shares that her age has brought wisdom and the assurance that she knows herself and her direction. No one tells her what to do. She's a mother and grandmother. She obtained a degree in history from UW-La Crosse. She is tribally enrolled with the Northern Arapaho, and her mother was from Western Shoshone. Her ancestors moved from the east as colonizers pushed them westward to Madeline Island and beyond. I knew I was going to break up saying this. It's powerful. As her ancestors moved westward, they settled at different points along the way, and the Northern Arapaho settled in what is now Wyoming. As an historian, she values the power of story. Laura Wright moved to La Crosse during the pandemic. Laura's family describes her ancestors as coming from Ireland and Germany to obtain cheap land in Missouri. These ancestors occupied land that was stolen from the Osage tribe. Laura and her family attended the University of Missouri, a land-grant college that was placed in the geographical center of the state in 1839 when the federal government lured colonizers to previously unoccupied land. Laura received a PhD from a university founded on the wealth of Mr. Johns Hopkins, which was acquired by the colonization of the Western Territories through the B&O Railroad. She is now one of the pastors at First Congregational Church in La Crosse, a church founded by colonizers of this area in 1852 and built initially on land which was purchased from the land office and stolen from the Ho-Chunk people.
Well, thank you for that beautiful music. I really felt good to hear that. I want to apologize for that introduction. It was kind of off the wall because I get silly sometimes. My name is Marian. My married name is Blackdeer. I am a widow. I've been widowed for 20 some years now. I am originally from California, born and raised. My husband is from Wisconsin, from this area, and he is Ho-Chunk, or was Ho-Chunk, still speaking the present term. My parents were different tribes. My dad was Northern Arapaho, and their reservation is in Wyoming, and that's where I am enrolled. My mother's people are Timbisha Shoshone from the Death Valley area of California and Nevada, right there. They were not federally recognized until I believe like 1984, or even it could have been 94, but it was really quite late that they were actually recognized as a tribe. They were lumped in with California Indians. And so, that was kind of interesting. But my sisters and I were brought up with our mom's people mostly, living in California in Lone Pine, right at the foot of Mount Whitney, which was really something super special at the time till Alaska butted in. So, we had our claim was that Mount Whitney was the highest mountain in the United States. So when Alaska came in, we got kicked out. Anyways, but it was a really beautiful valley to be born in. And at the time when I was young, the aqueduct had just been maybe 20 or 30 years that took the water from our area all the way down to Los Angeles. So in that time, then we did lose a lot of the things that we had, and one of them was the Owens River. And so, but anyways, I get sidetracked too. That's why I got these things. Anyway, my father's people are on the reservation in Wyoming with the Shoshone people, and the original with the government, the original agreement was that my people would get their own reservation, more up to the northern part of Wyoming in the Powder River area where we had gone for a long time. But in I think it was 1851, the Treaty of Fort Laramie, the reservation land that was set aside for my people was parts of Kansas, parts of Nebraska, and Colorado into Utah and Wyoming. And then that all to where we actually have no actual reservation of our own. We live on the Wind River Reservation. I think it's the fourth largest reservation in the United States, but that we share with the Shoshones because it was originally theirs. So when the government was moving us around, they put us over there with them, who are traditionally our enemies. But the chief at the time was one of their most revered people. Chief Washakie agreed to let our people come and live there. They were only supposed to stay for a short while until they could get moved again. But the government quit looking, and I guess the other places were too good for us, so they left us there, and then they paid the Shoshones so much for us to live there. So we have that reservation now, and it's rich in resources in a lot of ways. It does have it has a lot of minerals, has oil and gas, natural gas, but our people still are really in poverty. A lot of the same conditions that we have out in the outside world of unemployment, of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, all of the negatives. We have that on our land. And so I don't know, like what we were going to start off with was talking about the Doctrine of Discovery, which was in 1492 or no 3 or 4, 3 I think it was, which was right after the Columbus came and bumped into this land out here. Then that was a papal bull that by Pope Alexander, and he it was stated basically, finders keepers. If we don't need to worry about you guys. So whatever, if they run into any territory that is not governed by a Christian leader or Christian king, whatever, then that land is free to you. And of course, being as though, we didn't have Christianity in this so-called New World, then, it was free. So, and I did want to say, that there's been movements for the Catholic Church to rescind that bull. Now, I just did some looking around, and apparently part of the church's justification for not addressing it is to say that the subsequent papal proclamations more or less negated that, and so that they don't have to do it officially, that there is no official way for a pope to rescind someone else's bull. They just go ahead and write something else. So there have been, I just did a brief, looked at a few of them. So there's been about 3 or 4 that I've seen that kind of do overrule that. But there are still delegations of people, especially from Canada, who are going to the Vatican and seeking to address the Pope, asking him to make a clear statement on that. He has gone to Canada and apologized for the churches and for all of the things that have happened there, but it's still not exactly what the people want. So that was just that with the idea of the Doctrine of Discovery. So I wanted that little background in there before I really started. We had, Laura and I talked about, this is a really good document. It's the Federal Boarding School Initiative Investigative Report that was put out by Deb Holland in the Department of Interior. And so it just goes through a lot of the of the ideas of the history of the boarding schools, how they came about. So what I would like to do here is real quick, so I gotta look through my notes because I have them here. But what I had wanted to do to begin with was to just go briefly through the idea of how the federal government dealt with the Native people, and even pre-government, when the I don't want to call them settlers, but the interlopers when they came in, and when they first got here, the policy of the people was basically accommodation. Let's get along with these people. Let's try to get along with them so that we can survive. So there was a brief period of basically trying to get along and trying to learn from. So I think until they learned the things that they needed to survive in this world, they were fine. But then as soon as they felt that they did not need them anymore, then that's when it was like, okay, let's get their land. And that was one of the things that where they started the wars and began, and even back then, one of their main weapons against Native people was alcohol, because we did not have that in our world. So they realized that, and even as far as it goes in here, it's even Benjamin Franklin saying that, okay, well, now we're going to have to deal with these people. So how are we going to do it? Well, I think, that rum can be the means to do this. So it's been a federal policy all of these years, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, of that extermination, assimilation. Assimilation is we get used to you guys' ways, we adapt, we put ourselves aside. So there was so much of that in the mid 1800s on into the boarding schools era that was started in like 54 and then went on and on. So I want to talk a little bit about the idea of what effects the boarding school system had on the Native people. And when the boarding schools were first started, they were started like to be hundreds and thousands of miles away from the homes. And there was no, there was nothing, oh, we got this reservation, let's put it over here. No, the first one was in Pennsylvania, and that was Carlisle. And of course, that's a very famous place. Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. And the people mostly whose children were sent to these schools were the children of the leaders. And they would be like the sons and daughters of the chiefs or the head men. And those were the kids that were mostly taken. Some of it was because the parents agreed, because they were told that, they're going to get educated, they can come home, they will help your people to navigate, living with our society, that they'll speak English, they'll know how to read and write, they will speak so that they can help you, that they can help your people. And so that's why most of them sent their kids, was because the idea, we need to do something for our future. And that was the way. They did not know, they weren't told that as soon as those kids got there, they were going to be indoctrinated. They were going to have their culture, their identity as Native people to be wiped out. And, one of the, and I didn't quite find the right quote exactly, but the idea was, that idea of kill the Indian in them and save the man. And so they did that for the whole culture. So when these kids were being brought up into these reservations, into these boarding schools, they came from a tribal culture of nurturing, of being being considered sacred, being always treated with a lot of love. And then to go from that into these schools where immediately when they got there, it's like that said what that little girl says, you know, the parent says, keep this, remember these things. And they get there and they're immediately, their clothes are taken, their hair is cut. Everything that they know is done to erase who they are. And they become, you know, like these little blank slates that you can do the way you want with them. It's really hard sometimes, even nowadays, for people to talk about boarding schools because, you know, there are still people alive who went through those systems. And there are still boarding schools nowadays that are a little bit different, you know, supposedly. But at the time, hundreds and thousands of these kids died right where they were. They couldn't get used to the food. They didn't get used to the conditions. They were, you know, had all of these diseases that they didn't know how to deal with, and their bodies weren't made to contend with that. So there were a lot of thousands of kids that didn't get to go home, and they were just, you know, buried there. A lot of times their parents weren't even told they died because these kids were not, you know, they weren't going home like every summer. Summertime, for school was over, they would be leased out to farmers, to other people. The boys would have to do farm work. The girls would have to be domestics in the houses. And so that was how they were going to be assimilated into white society. They were going to learn how to do these types of jobs so that when they got done, they could teach, you know, other people, and they would be that's their labor force. And it's just kind of like, everybody's like Jim Thorpe, he's such a, you know, hero. But he got caught in that working for the summer thing. And, you know, he didn't get to go home. So what he did was he was working in, you know, on the farms, but he was also playing ball because he was a great athlete. So they let him play ball with the other people that knew better, other families that knew better. Their kids would play, but they would play under assumed names, so they could not get called out later. But he played under his own name. And so then after he won in the Olympics, then all of a sudden, oh, this guy played pro ball because he got paid for playing in the summer. And that's, you know, that's the justification for taking away his medals, which now have been returned to him, but or to his family, I should say. He's long dead. But I think that a part of the boarding school thing, and I know it's kind of hard because, you know, getting personal with this, my father was born in 1920. My grandfather was born in like 1894 or 6, somewhere in there. And so my grandfather, his ancestors, his mom and them, grandparents, were living in that area in that time when they were still free. So I don't, you know, my grandfather never really talked to him much. I'm a chicken kid. I didn't talk to it. I just didn't talk to old people. I was scared. I was scared of them. But my dad, like I said, he was born in 1920, and he went to school at St. Stephen's Mission. And it's a community about 20 miles or so from where they live in Ethity on the reservation. So seeing as how he went down there to go to school, I am figuring it had to be in a boarding situation because it was a boarding school also. That one was run by the Catholic Church. And there was one up in Fort Washakie that was run by the Episcopals or the Methodists. So they were already being colonized. I guess I kind of like my new word. I like that. But my dad, when we were growing up, we lived among my mom's people. My dad's people were in Wyoming. My mom's people were in California. We lived in California. And my mom and her family, all of her relatives, all of the community, Native community, all spoke Shoshone. And so that was something that we grew up every day, hearing Shoshone. And so we got to the point, I think, as older, my sister and I, where we could understand them when they were talking, but we couldn't talk. We were really, I guess we were just brought up with that thing about being embarrassed or ashamed if you make a mistake. So we did it, and our moms tried, my mom, her sister, and all of them, they've tried for a while to teach us kids, my cousins and all of us, how to talk. And we kind of picked up a few words here and there, but finally my cousin said something and it turned out to be something kind of bad, because she twisted that just two sounds around. And they were so upset, and they just smacked her in the side of the head. They told us, they said, we're not teaching you anymore. You guys, she said, you have nothing but white man's tongues. We're not going to bother. So that was it for us actually being taught to talk the language. And then when we moved away, I was almost 10. And after that, we didn't have a real, every day, bond with that community. So I did not learn how to speak the language. But my older sister and I, we were saying that if we were in a Shoshone community for maybe 6 months and were immersed, we could probably do it, because we still remember a lot, and she remembers more than I do, because she's older than me. And but with our dad, he said, I only know a few words. So he taught us words, like he taught us apple, he taught us sit down. He says, I don't know if this is true, but I don't want to say it, so I guess I won't. But it just makes me smile. But anyways, yeah, we did learn a few things, not much. And as far as spiritual, religious upbringing, we were going to church. And mom and dad weren't going with us, but my mom's, my aunt, she pitched us into a church membership drive for her Nazarene church. So we started going, and that was like 8 miles. And they said, well, if you come get them, you can have them. So she came out and got us. And not too long, well, a couple of 3-4 years, we were at that church. And the preacher's wife was my first grade teacher, and I thought that was pretty cool. And but then a lady came to town, and she wanted to start a church. And she was Native. She was Yurok from Northern California. And one of my grandmas had died, so her little house was empty. And it was probably about maybe half of this room here. And so they said to her, she wanted to use it. So family said, yeah, you can use that for a church. And so then we all started, my mom, my aunt, a bunch of Indian people started going there, because this lady is Indian, so we're going to go for that. And so we went to that church. It was a 4-square. We went there for quite a while until we moved to Bakersfield, and then we didn't have a church again. But we found we found one of those churches, and we went, and the people were not friendly, so we didn't go anymore. But my folks tried to keep us kids in a church situation. So we went to Assembly of God, we went to Seventh-day Adventist. We went, finally, kind of in middle school, then my dad started taking us to Catholic church. And he said that he liked the Catholic church better, because he said it felt more like what a church should feel like. He said he felt the reverence, he felt, that kind of respect that he wanted in a church. So that's where we went. We went there with him until, and my mom, she would not go. So dad took us, and then when his work schedule changed, mom would drop us off. Then after a while, it got to 8th grade, I just didn't want to go to church anymore. So I didn't, and they didn't raise fuss over it. And I didn't go to church again until my freshman year of college, and a friend of mine invited me to a folk mass, and I'd never heard of that. So that was just getting, so you could tell how old I am. That was quite a ways back. But I asked my dad one time after my mom passed away, because while I was married and had just been married and had my kids, and I used to go to my uncle's house, which was about half a mile away. I'd walk over to his house because he was the only one that had a telephone. And I would call my folks and call them collect, and maybe once or twice a month. And one time I went in there and my uncle said, he said, Marian, does your dad still speak Arapaho? And I looked at him and I was all in, so smart. My dad doesn't talk Arapaho. He just looked at me like, golly, are you a dummy? And he said to me, he said, Marian, he said, your dad was brought up with old people. He knows the old language. And I said, wow, I could not believe it. So he said, when he gets on I said, well, he said he didn't know. And he said, well, when you get him on the phone, let me talk to him. I said, okay. And I gave him my dad says, he'll take the call. I said, hey, Dad, I said, Uncle Chris wants to talk to you. Okay. My uncle talked to my dad for 10 minutes, did not say a word of English. And I was like, even if Dad doesn't, even if he can't talk it anymore, he knows it, he understands. And so after my mom passed away years later, I was talking with my father and I asked him, I said, Dad, why didn't you try to teach us? Why didn't you teach us? And I was really upset with him and I was ready to cry. And he looked at me and he just was really, it just looked sad. And he just said, Marian, he said, our ways are gone. He said, you have to live in this white man's world. And he said, knowing these things, they're not going to help you. You have to live out here. He said, our ways are gone. And I was still mad at him, but I kind of got an understanding of why. But I think a lot of that idea, he did get that at that boarding school when he was learning, how to navigate, because my dad, by that time he had gone down there. He was half orphan because his mother passed away when he was not quite 5 years old. And he used to say that I would have had a sister, but the little girl was born in January. She lived a couple of days and then she died. And then I was, after looking through all of these papers at the agency that give you everybody's notes and stuff, and my grandmother passed away in April and they said it was peritonitis. So it was, a complication of the birth. And then so the baby died and his mother died too. So he was alone with his dad. So my grandfather and him, they were together, but my dad ended up being brought up with, his mother's sisters because they were all considered the mothers. So he was brought up with them in their households and their families all that time until he was probably about 12, and then he went to live with his father. His father had remarried and lived in Washington State. So didn't really, it was quite a ways. But that again, and I wonder with my grandfather, because I never talked with him of, what he went through, how he did, because, he could write his name and I could see he was really good at math, but I don't know beyond that, how much really reading did he do, because after looking at our records, then of course his parents and, and my dad's parents, the grandparents they didn't speak English and they didn't do anything else like that. So that was something that I think that the disconnection, the dislocation that these boarding schools, they may not have actually done the full job they wanted to have done, but they did enough to really make our lives real difficult. And, like today, people are complaining of, oh, there's just nothing but a bunch of drunks. There's nothing but a bunch of this. and they don't stop to think of the disruption and the trauma. And trauma is a real easy word to use nowadays, trauma, but it is, because it's like when everything you have and everything you're ever taught and everything you've ever felt is all of a sudden is trying to be crushed out of you, then how you do it. So today, I think my dad was born in oh my God, that's like, he'd be 103 this year. About that, old man. It's taken a long time to start getting a balance back. And I think that's happening now, even though it's a little bit off, because so many tribes now are having their historic preservation, their language offices. So they are trying, and it's going to be coming back in a little bit different way, but it will be back. There's the same thing with the ceremonies, and people are starting to do things like fasting. And I know that one of the things I think that makes it harder is that nowadays people get really touchy about who's got rights to do what, who can speak in who. And I think that, we have to recognize we're not monolith, it's not like for instance, when my husband passed away, one of the elders said to me, that I could come and ask him questions if I wanted to, but he wasn't in my husband's clan, but he was an elder. And so, he was a really elder. He was like in his 90s. So he was, way top of the line. And so I took my son, because I had a question. So I took my younger son and asked him. And he just said, well, this in general. And then he said, there is no Ho-Chunk culture. And I was like, what the? Because that's what I always heard, Ho-Chunk culture. But he said, we have many cultures within that. Each clan is a culture. Each family is a culture, because you have different ways. He said, that's why, he said, for me, he said, my clan, I can't tell someone from a different clan if they're doing something right or not, because that is their way and they know that. So he said, we aren't all one. He said, in general, yeah, we do have, but it's deeper than that. And so
Marian, I'm wondering if you will be open for people to talk with you after the
Yeah.
service, because people would love to hear more about your story.
Yeah.
And Laura, I don't know if you're going to say any summary at the end here.
What
I don't think we're going to have time to have questions from the whole group, but if you have some things you want to say to summarize.
I told you I was a
Oh,
blabbermouth.
we love hearing your story. I just want to be respectful
Yeah.
of people needing to
No,
read
I know.
So I'm Laura Wright, and I think it's important in these contexts, especially as a white person, to only share those stories that you've earned. The story that I've earned is my role as pastor at First Congregational, and First Congregational United Church of Christ, and that we are working with Marian, because as a church, we sponsor those boarding schools.
Oh, we forgot.
The FSPA locally had a boarding school in Odena, Wisconsin. The Lutherans also had a boarding school in Wittenberg here in Wisconsin. We will have a talk in February 15th at the Community Conversations with a historian from Luther College on the Ho-Chunk uprising against that Lutheran clergy. And so I invite you, so in working with Marian, we are looking to tell that story of what the church has done locally. It's too easy when it goes far away, and you talk about even Pennsylvania. We did this, our churches did this locally. And so we have applied for a grant, and Marian is helping us direct that grant that we received to bring in many different voices to tell that uncomfortable story. In fact, when I first started looking into this issue, I was told by people in my denomination, oh, we were one of the good ones. I asked Marian, and she said, read this book. And I found white teachers in the school that my church sponsored calling the sheriff on people in religious events to take children out of their homes. That is the story that I quote, have earned. That is the story of my church. That is the story of my people. And that is the story that I am called to tell. And so I'm grateful for Marian. She has that story as well. And so I invite you in the fall, we will start having these conversations. It's part of the reason we came to speak with you was to see if you could join us. So Susan McParker and Dave were talking about possibly applying for a grant to hold a film series while we hear those different stories. If you have other community organizations to join us so that this can become a community event where we as white churches and white folks recognize the trauma that we did, join us. And that's what I would ask of you.